This romance was a new chapter for him, an opportunity to live a youthful life with someone that's very beautiful.
They were headed back to Southern California to celebrate their first Thanksgiving together.
The smell coming out of the bag was not something you can describe.
So the coroner investigator comes out, and he said, "This is a human."
And the lifestyle that she thought she was going to live was all a lie.
Things started to fall apart a little bit.
She wanted payback.
I did the whole this in 2 hours. Shut him up.
That's strange. And not only strange, that is insane.
I couldn't believe I did what I did.
In the city of Costa Mesa, the California dream is alive and well.
Costa Mesa is a relatively small town, and it is sunny all the time. A lot of people will settle in Costa Mesa because they can be so close to the beach without having to buy really expensive property.
It's around 2 p.m. on December 1st, 1991, when Costa Mesa resident Jose Escoval calls 911. He tells the operator of a concerning interaction he just had with his ex-girlfriend.
Jose receives a knock on his door.
He did look out the window and see a red Corvette in his driveway. Didn't recognize the car. He opened the door, and it was a former girlfriend, somebody that had lived with him on and off. He'd broken up a year ago, but still maintained a relationship. She was very disheveled, very upset, had gloves on her hands, wanted his help. So he invited her into the apartment, and she sat down and basically told him she wanted to elicit his help, his car, to get rid of her husband's body.
He says, "Hold on, just stay right there."
As soon as he was able to get out of her presence, he went straight to a payphone to call the police and say, "Hey, I need some help."
He identifies the woman as Omaima Nelson. Her husband's name is Bill.
Police dispatchers told him to stay put. An officer would meet with him very soon.
Born in 1935 and raised in Texas, Bill Nelson left a big impression.
Bill was a flamboyant kind of a man. He drove a red Corvette.
He was a dyed-in-the-wool Texan, known for his red cowboy boots and big belt buckles, and gregarious personality, fun to be around, liked to engage people, had a very bubbly personality, told tall tales and things of that nature.
This guy was larger than life in more ways than one. I mean, we're talking 6'4", 230 pounds, wearing red cowboy boots and a red hat. And many people, they took to Bill.
Bill Nelson had several wives, and he had kids with those wives, and he had grandkids with those kids. His first wife, I believe they lived in Florida, and his second wife in Texas, his third wife in Texas.
To earn a living, Bill was a jack of all trades.
Bill Nelson was a pilot. He crop dusted. He had a knowledge of computers to the point where he could take old ones apart and reassemble them and then at some point sell them. He also worked for a mortgage company.
By the early 90s, Bill was living in California. In the fall of 1991, he met a beautiful young woman who was also half his age.
One night at the pool hall, Omaima, she walks in, just kind of perusing the place. He said, "Who is that? Those high cheekbones, that beautiful hair?" She was this Egyptian goddess, and he wanted to know more. Omaima was born in southern Egypt along the Nile River, kind of near the Sudanese border, and she was really born into a village that was really poor.
Omaima was raised in a Muslim household. She was devout. She met a oil worker while she was back in Egypt, and they started a relationship. When her mother heard that the relationship was getting kind of serious, she insisted that they get married. And at some point after the marriage, he was called back to Houston, Texas, and she accompanied him.
Around age 18, Omaima is faced with the possibility of the American dream, to live a totally different life. When she arrived, she spoke minimal English. Imagine being in a country where you are not able to stand up for yourself, you're not able to communicate your basic needs outside of your partner, you rely on him for everything.
He turned out to be a violent man. So she became a battered woman at 18 here in America. She managed to get help from a battered women's shelter and get away from him.
In 1987, Omaima left Texas and headed for California.
After divorcing her first husband, she moved in with her sister in San Clemente, California, located south of Costa Mesa. And she took up several jobs, one of which was being a model at some lingerie place in the mall.
She was a beautiful, beautiful woman with high cheekbones, and, you know, people would look her way. But the money wasn't coming in fast enough. She wanted more. She was attracted to these older men. To her, they provided protection, they provided stability, and they provided money.
Omaima had the belief that if she found a nice older man, that man would both take care of her and be kind.
And at 23 years old, Omaima met 56-year-old Bill Nelson at a bar.
She sees a big old statuesque guy. He was commanding the entire room, telling his stories, had everybody captivated.
Bill wooed Omaima with his cowboy persona and promises of a better life.
He may have mentioned that he, lived a lavish life, had a red Corvette, may have even owned a cattle ranch.
For Mr. Nelson, I imagine this romance was a new chapter for him, an opportunity to live a young, joyful, youthful life with someone that's very beautiful.
Once Omaima and Bill Nelson met each other, they were inseparable for days at a time, even a couple of weeks before he decided, you know what, I want you to meet my family. So they took a road trip to Arkansas and Texas, and that's where his family was. And on that trip, they made a big decision. He made the decision to propose to her, and not just propose, but within a day, it's time to get married.
And he drove to Phoenix, Arizona, where a justice of the peace married him.
The newlyweds continued their road trip, sharing the good news with Bill's family.
Omaima was elated. She finally found a family that she felt like she gelled with. She really felt this sense of belonging thanks to Bill, her new husband.
Following the road trip, the couple looked forward to spending the holidays together.
They were headed back to Southern California to celebrate their first Thanksgiving together.
But 3 days after Thanksgiving, Omaima's ex, Jose Escobar, calls 911 to report that Omaima showed up at his doorstep, asking him to help move Bill's body.
Police dispatchers told him to stay put, that they'd have officers running over to his house on Monte Vista, but an officer would meet with him very soon.
While Jose waits at the payphone, officers head to his home.
When police get to Joel's residence, Omaima's inside. And one of the officers goes inside to speak with her, start asking her some questions.
She's dressed all in black. She's got a black blazer on, black pants, even black leather gloves on her hands.
When asked about her husband, Omaima says he is out of town.
He'd spent Thanksgiving with her on Thursday, and on Friday he'd left for a business trip, and she expected him back the following Friday. asked her kind of the circumstances around her connection to Jose. And she said she'd known him, past boyfriend. She'd come over to see if she could stay there because Bill was gone.
There was another police officer, a couple of them outside, and that's when they spotted that red Corvette.
We looked inside the Corvette. Officer Hogue spotted a 50-gallon trash bag, which was tied at the top, sitting on the front seat. So Officer Hogue removed it and set it down on the front yard grass and cut it open with a penknife. The smell is not something you can describe.
Is unfolding at a home in Costa Mesa, California.
Parked out front of the location was a Corvette, and Officer Hogue looked inside and saw a big trash bag that was tied at the top, sitting in plain view. Then Officer Hogue cut the bag open with a penknife he had. At that point, we could see a liquid substance in the bag, and the smell that was emanating from the bag was so powerful.
Meanwhile, officers find the homeowner, Jose Escoval, at a nearby payphone. Jose explains what prompted him to call 911.
About 2 in the afternoon, somebody was knocking on the door, and he looked out, saw the red Corvette, opened the door, and it was Omaima. She removed the black gloves that she was wearing. He saw that her hands had been cut with what looked like a knife. She had bruises on her arms, on her legs, so he invited her into the apartment.
She says, "I need your help." Jose says, "With what?" She tells him that her husband attacked her and she ended up killing him.
She killed him, cut him up. She had a trash bag in the car right now and would pay him a huge sum of money if he would just help her.
"I just need to move his body." And then she offers him $75,000 and 2 motorcycles if he actually obliges. He says, "Hold on, just stay right there."
Jose left the house and found a payphone and called 911.
Back at Jose's house, a grim discovery is underway.
The whole show was this bag that was in the back of the Corvette. One of the officers had taken the bag out of the car, opened it up. I look inside the bag, and I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. It just looks kind of nasty. I said, you know, this could be pig entrails for all I know. The thing that went through my mind, I need to identify this as human. Because I'm still thinking, this is some kind of gag. This is some kind of misdirection of some sort. I'm just still not believing that this is human internal parts that are in this bag. So we're going to need a coroner out here. So the coroner investigator comes out. We opened up a big plastic cloth to the ground, and we got the remains out onto the cloth. And then all of a sudden he says, "Hey, you better look at this." I go, "What?" He says, "Do you know what those little black spots on this organ is?" I said, "I got no idea what that is." He said, "That's carbon." I said, "It is?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You know where that comes from?" I said, "No." He said, "It comes from smoking." And he said, "So unless you know any pigs that smoke, this is a human."
Investigators turn to Omaima.
We introduced ourselves, said obviously we don't want to really be talking out here on the street. Would you mind accompanying us to the police department for an interview? And she agreed.
But law enforcement has another priority before they talk to Omaima.
We were able to determine from her identification where she lived with her husband.
Officers immediately went over to that apartment to see if there was, somebody in distress, somebody hurt.
It was locked. We obtained a key from the manager. I decided we had exigent circumstances to enter the apartment to see if there was someone inside that was injured and needed medical assistance. Upon entering the apartment, we instantly ascertained that nothing was amiss in the living room. Nothing seemed out of place. Upon entering the bedroom, Officer Hogan and I entered together, and we saw blood spots on the side of a mattress. We then walked back out of the bedroom and entered the kitchen area, which was a mess. Sitting on the counter was a crock pot. There was a lot of dishes in the sink and on the countertop. And for some reason, I decided to open the top freezer door of the refrigerator, and I saw this round object in foil. And I tapped on it with my finger and said to Officer Hogue, "Hey, Danny, I wonder if this is his..."
Officers with the Costa Mesa Police Department make troubling discoveries inside the home of Omaima and Bill Nelson.
We saw blood spots on the side of the mattress.
They go to the freezer, open it up, big ball of aluminum foil.
We had the right, upon entering the apartment under exigent circumstances, to look to see what's in plain sight or even in a closet. But we would need a search warrant to get back into the apartment and to make a detailed search.
As they wait for the warrant to come through, investigators conduct an interview with Omaima.
We got to the station and escorted her to an interview room. She wanted a cigarette. It was obvious that she was distressed. She was talking a mile a minute. She had cuts and bruises all over her.
My ass fighting Bob.
What happened?
Well, I went for a drink and three girls fighting with me there, and they got scratched.
Where is Bill away right now? Is he here in town, or is he out of town, or where is he?
He's out of town.
Did you tell Jose today that you killed your husband?
No, I did not.
What do you know about the garbage sack that was in your car?
Well, what is it?
Well, I'm asking you. What do you know about it?
I didn't know nothing about it.
Don't know anything about it? Oh.
Omaima offers an explanation.
She said Jose had, under false pretext, wanted to drive the red Corvette, had left for an hour, and when he came back, that bag must have been in it. So Jose must have put the bag in the car. Then she said she'd been to a laundromat doing laundry earlier in the day and decided to walk next door to a bar, but left her car unlocked. And during that time, somebody must have put a bag behind the front passenger seat. She didn't know anything about it. It would go from one extreme to the other. It was very non-cogent.
The interview goes on, and Omaima's story continues to change.
And then at some point she said that Bill had raped her.
He went tied me up. And I said, no, not tied me up.
What did he tie you to?
To the bed.
Did you kill Bill because he did this to you? Tell him the truth of it.
I didn't burn.
Just after 10 p.m., the interview ends, as Omaima is escorted to the hospital for a physical examination.
A search warrant was granted for the premises, and I responded over to serve the search warrant at about 2 in the morning.
Investigators start in the bedroom, where the patrol officer spotted blood.
Next to what I presume was Bill's side of the bed were a pair of red cowboy boots and some boot shining materials on a rug. To the first eye, it looks okay.
The bed was made, mattress was on top. You lift the mattress and the blood was underneath it.
It's saturated with blood and the box spring. And then you realize that there was a headboard at one point on that bed, but the headboard was broken into several pieces and it was stashed behind the head of the bed. Did a search of the closet. A small steam iron in the corner of the closet was broken. The handle was broken off of it. Wrapped up in newspaper in the closet was also a porcelain lamp that had been broken and a crushed lampshade.
Investigators moved to the living room.
There was boxes piled up, computer parts piled up, laying around.
We saw that most all of these boxes contained trash bags, and in those trash bags were other trash bags, and in those trash bags were what appeared to be human body parts.
The disturbing scene becomes even more troubling.
We did find a box that had 2 human hands in it. It was obvious that the hands were cooked. You know, they looked to be fried or something. Detectives were searching the kitchen, and officers started going through the refrigerator, the freezer.
They locate the large item wrapped in foil.
Take that out, open it up. It looked like a human head. I mean, that looked like a prop out of a horror movie, is what it looked like.
And also wrapped in a piece of tinfoil were genitals, male genitals. The genitals appeared as if they'd also been cooked and wrapped in tinfoil.
This is a house of horrors. It was pretty shocking.
Investigators question whether Omaima is physically capable of such violence.
The thing for me is she's petite, and I knew from Mr. Nelson's driver's license that he was, over 6 foot, 250 pounds. But in one particular box, in amongst the trash bags, were a pair of human legs, and those legs had ligature marks around the ankles. At the foot of the bed was a wicker clothes hamper full of dirty clothes, and in amongst those clothes were what appeared to be bloody garments. There was a necktie, men's necktie that was tied like a ligature. There was a section of rope that had some knots in it that appeared to be a ligature.
She says that Bill tied her to a bed, but Bill was the one with ligature marks. So everything she was saying was a...
On the morning of December 2nd, 1991, Omaima Nelson returns to the Costa Mesa police station following an examination at a local hospital. She is met with handcuffs.
Well, I'm going to be placing you under arrest at this time.
Why?
For suspicion of murder.
I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him.
I remember driving with my partner down to the coroner's office to witness the autopsy. We get to the coroner's office, and the watch commander calls and says, "Hey, Omaima wants to talk to you again."
Just tell me what you want to tell me and I'll listen.
I think I did kill him unconscious.
You think you killed him unconscious?
Yeah, because he did this to me, and I couldn't believe I did what I did.
Omaima claimed that her husband became physically abusive shortly after the wedding. She told police that she began to cope with the abuse through drinking alcohol and using drugs. During this time, she also told them that she started having visual hallucinations and auditory hallucinations, telling her to murder her husband.
So all I remember that I hit him to self-defense or something.
How did you hit him?
I think I hit him with the lamp or something to get off me.
How did you kill him?
I don't remember how I killed him.
Omaima does remember bits of the gory events that followed.
I did all this in 2 hours. Chopped him up pieces in 2 hours.
Chopped him up? Bill in 2 hours?
Yeah. And all I remember that his head was flying from his body, hit the ceiling up there, and made a blood in the ceiling. And I fall asleep, and I get up in the morning, and I found the trash bag, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what happened.
She said that she heard voices. The Egyptian gods were helping her, telling her things.
She was telling me that who killed, he must die. Who killed, he be killed. And she turned around and she walked away. And the next when I get up, I checked, I find my name and his name was written by blood in the mirror. It said, "Me and you."
What was written in blood?
Me and you.
Did you cook some parts of Bill before you wrapped him up in the plastic?
No, I'm not usually eater much either. I don't eat meat.
You don't eat meat?
No, I don't eat the meat.
You're a vegetarian?
Vegetarian, yes.
She would go from voices, I'm hearing people from the dead telling me these things, and Bill's head's here, and he's cut up, and there's body parts all over this place. She didn't really confess to anything other than she blacked out, she heard voices, there was a phone call, somebody said, look in the freezer, look in the trash bags. It didn't make any sense. There's no continuity to this thing. She was all over the map.
Well, I think you're telling me part of the truth, but not all of it.
Well, I think I need to talk to the psychiatrist to just see the last of my mind.
We kind of sized her up as somebody that was just grasping at straws, trying to work herself out of this bad situation.
Following the interrogation, investigators get word that the coroner has positively identified the remains as Bill Nelson.
The coroner's office made a notification to next of kin. Bill's wife in Santa Maria, California was notified. He also had a son in Los Angeles.
I hate it for the family that has to even live through this because it's horrible. And truly, it is your worst nightmare.
Following her arrest, Omaima meets with multiple mental health professionals. Her story changes again and takes a shocking turn.
She was also able to provide gruesome details about the things that she did to her husband. Some of these details include dismembering her husband, boiling her husband, deep frying parts of his body.
She talked about cooking her husband, that his ribs tasted sweet. She put barbecue sauce on them and things of that nature.
That's strange. And not only strange, that is insane.
Investigators consider whether Omaima is telling the truth or setting up her defense.
It was really hard to believe that that happened. It really was.
Like one line, she was trying to say self-defense. The other line, she was trying to say criminal insanity.
It was obvious that she would throw things out and see what stuck.
Omaima's attorneys hire their own expert. In interviews, Dr. Nancy Kaiser-Boyd delves into Omaima's upbringing in Egypt.
She had a terrible childhood. She'd been sexually assaulted. Her father often beat her, and her stepmother there beat her also.
In addition to her stressful home environment, she lived in a culture during a time where female circumcision was very popular, and so this is something that she experienced very young, at 7 years old.
They took her to a dark place. She remembered it was 3 older women. Her mother wasn't there. She thought they were killing her. She described extraordinary pain and fear, and then she became unconscious. She didn't wake until her mother came and touched her. And by that time, she told me that they were preparing for her burial because they thought she was dead.
In your home country, and then you move to a foreign country, you don't realize how much control and presence you have in your own life. In your home country, you know the language, you know the slang, you know the scary neighborhoods, you know the players that you want to stay away from. I imagine this is Omaima's experience. She met this oil worker who could offer her a better life, and they fell in love very quickly. They married, and then they moved to the United States. When you live in a place where there's a lot of violence and poverty, with the history that she's had, and she has an opportunity to move on and move to a different country where she doesn't have to face feeling objectified every single day of her life, who wouldn't want to move? She quickly realized that her American dream was not going to be what she thought it was going to be. She has to rely on another person the same way she was relying on other people in her previous country, and she has to rely on a man to do everything for her. And I imagine that was the exact...
Omaima Nelson is behind bars. Accused of brutally dismembering her husband of just a few weeks. In interviews with a psychologist, Omaima reveals she suffered sexual abuse, violence, and female circumcision.
We had her examined by a gynecologist, and that doctor told us that her vaginal area had a lot of scar tissue and that sex would be very painful for her.
During the trial prep, Omaima's defense team, her attorney and investigator, actually flew to this suburb of Cairo and did in-depth interviews of her family members and to kind of give a glimpse of her childhood growing up and possibly the abuses involved, to show that she'd had a series of dominating males in her life and that she'd experienced not only the circumcision but sexual assault. And so there was definitely some aspects of her past that they were trying to show contributed to this murder.
Detectives and prosecutors prepare to counter whatever defense Omaima brings to court. They speak with medical professionals who examined Omaima on the day of her arrest.
The hospital report concluded that there were no signs of rape or sexual assault.
She also mentioned that she was the one who had been held down and tied to this bedpost. No ligature marks at all around her wrists or her ankles. In fact, medical professionals said she had cuts on her, cuts that came from when she was stabbing Bill.
Investigators reach out to Bill's family, including his ex-wives.
Bill was very acquainted with family and his children. His kids would call him on a fairly regular basis, and yeah, he was just a great dad.
When I spoke to Bill's ex-wife, she spoke very fondly of Bill. And I was struck at one point that she really liked this guy. And she was deeply hurt by what happened to him.
In talking to the family, it was obvious that Bill Nelson was not a violent person. No evidence of that.
Investigators find no record of violence or abuse on Bill's behalf. Omaima is a different story.
One incident included her going to the pharmacy and grabbing whatever she wanted out of there and stealing without paying for this stuff. 2 security guards were watching her, and when they tried to stop her, she got extremely violent with them, so much so she ended up attacking them so viciously that she bit the chest of one of the women, the female security guards. She bit her breast so hard that she almost bit it off, and she also grabbed the vagina of the security guard as well.
As news of the gruesome crime spreads across the state, law enforcement gets a phone call.
Robert Hansen saw the news report of Omaima's crimes against Bill Nelson.
Mr. Robert Hansen, elderly, single, lived in an apartment, fairly successful business person. He met Omaima in a bar, and over conversation, one thing led to another, and she went home with him. Obviously, there was a relationship that started.
At one point during their relationship, they were having sex, and they were doing what she likes to call kinky sex.
She gets over there and ties him up, but instead of doing the kinky sexual thing that she promised, she attempted to rob him and pulls a gun on him. The defendant didn't tie the restraints tight enough because Robert was able to get free and escape from her. But he was so embarrassed that he never called the police. But once he saw the report in the news of Bill Nelson, he had to come forward. He couldn't keep silent because she had done something similar to him and he survived. So this wasn't Omaima's first rodeo.
Bill Nelson's body. His wife, Omaima, is set to stand trial.
When the case goes to trial, December 1992, prosecutors immediately try to paint Omaima as this woman who wanted this lavish lifestyle that she was promised by Bill Nelson, and she was entitled to get this lifestyle.
Omaima Nelson was an ex-model, beautiful woman of Egyptian descent, very attractive, And she would seek out older men to fleece them for their money.
Bill was talking about being wealthy and owning a cattle ranch and having money, which fit right into what she was looking for. She was looking for another sugar daddy.
Following their whirlwind romance and wedding, a different truth emerged.
Things started to fall apart a little bit. She realized that Bill wasn't the man that he might be saying he is. He didn't have that cattle ranch. It became real to her that Bill had purported himself to be something other than he was.
The things that Bill promised her and the lifestyle that she thought she was going to live was all a lie. Bill didn't have any money, and she wanted payback.
On Thanksgiving Day, tensions were high, and Mr. Nelson found himself tied to a bed.
She immobilized him under a false pretext. Probably hit him with the iron. Several times, about 30 times. The iron broke during this assault. Lamp was used, also broken. And then he was stabbed too. Then started cutting him up.
From November 28th till December 1st, she completely destroyed her husband's body.
Next door neighbor, when he interviewed him, he said he was able to hear through their common wall chopping and the sink running and the garbage disposal running, to the point where he believed that the garbage disposal had given up. This activity went on through the early morning hours, quite prolonged.
Prosecutors also call Robert Hansen to the stand.
So Robert's story shows the defendant's modus operandi, and he became a star witness in the prosecution's case against her, showing that she had previously tried to do this to someone else.
Omima's attorneys do not attempt an insanity plea.
Her lawyer argued that this was self-defense or imperfect self-defense, which is a sudden belief that you need to defend yourself by killing the other person.
Dr. Kaiser Boyd takes the stand.
What she told me was that he had her tied to the bed, and he was sitting on top of her, and he was angry, and he had his pocket knife out, and he was cutting her on the breasts. And she, as you can imagine, cutting is a trigger for someone who's had genital circumcision, so she flipped out. And she got loose, and she started hitting him with a lamp by the bed. She jumped up and grabbed an iron that was in the room. And started beating him with that. She said he fell on the bed, and she stabbed him with scissors. She cut him up because she didn't want him to be able to enter the afterlife. The reason Egyptians wrapped their dead and mummified them was so they could enter heaven whole. She told me she hoped if she got to heaven, she would never see him there.
Omima took the stand herself to testify in this case. And she began to share with them in a very emotional, heartfelt testimony about, first of all, her life and the continuous abuse and the trauma and the pain.
She was a victim of sexual assault, of child abuse, of female genital mutilation, and all of this trauma, like cumulatively over the years, contributed to her psychological stressors that caused her to do this.
The jury deliberates for 6 days.
I was on needles and pins. I didn't know what the outcome would be.
Ultimately, they came and found her guilty with second-degree murder, and she received 25 years to life.
But Omima's story doesn't end with the verdict.
While in prison, Omima meets another older gentleman that's rich. And that relationship began to flourish. They became married. However, during the marriage, her husband dies, but he also leaves her with a lot of money. And now she's up for parole in 2026, and she may get her dream to finally live the American dream.
The life that she lived was brutal, and it's very clear to me that it followed her everywhere that she went.
I understand her anger. However, it does not justify the gruesome, horrible, horrific crime that she committed. She doesn't deserve to be free. I don't think you can rehabilitate evil.
Roanoke is nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Where we are in Roanoke, Virginia, I mean, the mountains, the trails, the scenery, it's beautiful. It's breathtaking.
When my husband and I moved here to Roanoke, I felt the art scene was wonderful. The local music scene was wonderful. It's enough of a city, and then you can be out in the country in just about 15 minutes.
Originally known as Big Lick, Roanoke got its name after the N&W Railroad moved their headquarters here in 1882.
The president of the N&W Railway did not want his headquarters in a place called Big Lick. So he asked for a name change.
City officials settled on Roanoke, named for the Roanoke River that flows through town. As railway construction began in the city, workers, many of whom were African American, flooded into Roanoke in search of employment.
African Americans came to the city in order to build a better life for themselves.
But their reception was often met with racism.
So we did have very segregated housing policies that really posited various cultural groups in tightly confined neighborhood sections.
African American residents were confined to the northeast quadrant of Roanoke, where they still managed to build a thriving community.
You get an opportunity for families of African American descent to all be together in a neighborhood, which means that the doctor is living next door to the plumber, so their children and their families were connected.
But in the 1960s, an aggressive government program called Urban Renewal wreaked havoc on Roanoke's black community.
Urban renewal was an effort to eliminate, quote unquote, blighted neighborhoods. Black removal was what it was at the end of the day. People will often ask, well, what happened to the 2,000 families that got displaced? Well, the answer then was the creation of federally subsidized housing projects.
These housing projects ultimately became hotbeds of criminal activity.
There was not a lot of economic mobility in federal housing projects, and so these did become pockets of criminal activity, drug activity, because they were economically depressed.
Roanoke became a town divided. Affluent residents and tourists experienced a picturesque paradise, while others just a few blocks away live a life of poverty and struggle.
Those invisible lines exist here in Roanoke because if your basic needs, food, shelter, employment, those things are not being met, then going hiking is not on your radar.
But in 2017, the brutal murders of two promising and beloved young men will expose the cracks in Roanoke's pristine facade, forcing residents to finally face the truth about their charming tourist town. On the early morning of June 15, 2017, 911 dispatchers received reports of gunfire outside a Roanoke apartment complex.
She had multiple 911 calls coming in for people shooting.
In particular, one neighbor, the initial volley of shots actually went through their window and into a wall above where their bed was while they were sleeping.
They're hearing gunshots, repeated gunshots, and they don't know what to do.
Officers rushed to the area.
So the apartment complex was located up off of Tuckawanna Circle, which is in northwest Roanoke.
When officers arrive at the complex, there's no sign of the gunman. Instead, they find a young black male clinging to life.
He obviously had been shot. They were attending to him, trying to get rescue units on scene as soon as possible.
The victim is immediately rushed to the ER.
It's chaos. When I get there, we got to start working this scene and canvassing and finding out who knew what. so we could start piecing this together. Officers were marking off everything. The next thing I did was I went to the hospital. I went into the ER. The surgeon's trying to save the young male, so his chest was cracked. He was laying wide open where they were trying to stop the bleeding and create a heartbeat.
Tragically, surgeons are unable to save the young man.
He was deceased on the operating table. It's a shame. It's a shame to see somebody like that.
So now it was evident that we had a homicide on our hands.
Well, I actually could see the bullet holes, and he had been struck multiple times. At least one of those bullets was recovered from his body.
The victim isn't carrying a phone or ID, but because he appears to be of high school age, Detective Dillon releases the victim's picture to area school resource officers.
It was probably 30 minutes to an hour later before I knew who the deceased was.
A resource officer from nearby Patrick Henry High School texts Detective Dillon. He recognizes the victim as 17-year-old Nicholas Lee, a recent Patrick Henry graduate.
The officer, he was a real good kid, man. I liked him. He was an earnest kid. Like, you could tell that he was just very likable.
Detective Dillon returns to the crime scene, where investigators are trying to make sense of what transpired that night.
When I get there, I realized what we had was a very wide crime scene. There was a different area where the shells were found, where a bullet was found, and then a different area where the body was found. The size of the scene was probably 100 yards by 50 yards. And so now I've got a football field that I'm working with.
Evidence found at the scene suggests the first shots were fired from the parking lot of an adjacent apartment building.
We found multiple .380 shell casings kind of scattered in that initial area where the volley of shots took place.
From there, it appears that Nicholas ran for his life.
You could look at the holes on the apartment, and they were going from left to right as shots would be ringing out, and it looked like somebody was shooting at somebody running.
We don't know exactly when, at what point during this chase the first round hits Nicholas, but we do know that there was a round that hit Nicholas. We have witnesses as he's running through the apartment that note seeing a young individual that we find to be Nicholas is kind of holding his side, and he's running away from two other individuals.
Another witness says she saw Nicholas in his final moments.
They heard clawing at their window. When they pulled the curtains back and looked, they saw what they described as a young black male attempting to claw at the window to get in.
So they saw him trying to get into their window to get away from the people that were trying to kill him.
Right beside that window, probably about 6 feet approximately, is where he ultimately caught up with Nicholas. The two assailants shot him twice in the back and then fled the scene. And very shortly thereafter, Nicholas crawled into a recessed landing outside an apartment, and that's where police were able to locate him.
But who would want to harm 17-year-old Nicholas Lee, and why?
There's an intentionality with the method in which Nicholas was shot and killed. For someone of that age to be gunned down in such an impersonal manner, to be right up close and to finish him off in that way, that was certainly alarming.
Near the scene, detectives find something they hope will help them answer that question: a discarded cell phone.
You've got shell casings probably 50 yards away in one corner. You've got a body found 60 yards away, and then you've got 30 yards north of that, a phone found over a fence underneath a bush. And you're like, man, is this even related, or somebody just dropped a phone?
Detectives can't open the phone without a search warrant. While they wait for a judge to sign off on their request, investigators drive to the Lee family's residence.
Thursday morning, 2 o'clock, knock on the door. Look out the door, and there's a police officer and a guy in civilian clothes.
So it was me and another detective went out to make notification, and I have done it many a time, but you know, it's always tough.
I'm glad he didn't pull any punches. He just flat out come in and said, "I have bad news. They can tell you, but your son is dead." It's hard to digest, hard to take from, "Are you sure it's Nicholas? Are you sure?" And how? Why? What happened? Where was he? What was he doing? All those questions coming to you, and they
shaken, and 17-year-old Nicholas Lee dead.
For someone to chase the victim for a prolonged duration and then finish that victim with multiple shots, that tells me that there's a little more going on than just a random act of violence. They had a need or a want to kill that individual, and they saw it through.
Nicholas's family is just learning the tragic news.
It was a rough hour there. All those stages of grief, they all happen at the same time. One right after the other. Denial, anger, why? What can I do? What could I have done wrong? Guilt, all that kind of stuff.
We hugged, we cried, and we sat in silence. We didn't know what to do. 1 week, he would have been 18.
He radiated joy. He completed our family that we didn't even know was missing before him. But once he was there, we knew we were complete.
Nicholas was born on June 22nd, 1999 in Texas.
Where he came from his birth family, it was horrible and tragic from the get-go.
His biological mother was drinking and taking cocaine. So Nicholas was born alcohol fetal and cocaine addicted at 29 weeks old. Yeah, he had a rough start.
Nicholas was put into foster care as an infant and was then placed with the Lee family. He thrived in his new environment.
He got happier and happier. He grew, he gained weight, his little face filled out. Then we became Mommy and Daddy, and that's what he called us. So he was ours.
By the age of 3, Nicholas was officially adopted by the Lee family. Throughout his life, he continued to be the center of attention in his forever home.
He was special. I don't know what it was, but it was magical with him. He was the light and joy. He would light up the room.
I considered him as my brother. Every time I wanted something, he would be there. If I needed somebody to talk to, he would be there. Telling me, don't do this, don't hang with these people, hang with those people instead.
In 2015, the Lees moved to Roanoke to be closer to their older daughter, Brandy.
I begged them, Mom and Dad, come here to Roanoke, come live here with me. And so they ultimately decided to move here in retirement and let Nicholas finish high school here.
For the Lee family, it was a happy reunion. Tucked in a quiet corner of Southwest Virginia, Roanoke felt like a safer community from the one they had left behind.
They were living in South Carolina at the time, and they weren't really happy with the violence that was in their city. There were gangs there.
Nicholas's parents enrolled their son at Patrick Henry High School.
I chose the school. It was so nice looking from the outside. New, it had a good reputation. So I said, yeah, this is going to be a good fit for him.
By June of 2017, Nicholas had graduated high school and a bright future lay ahead.
He graduated, and it was the happiest day of his life. It seemed like he was just tickled pink.
Nicholas and I had lots of conversations about the future. Nicholas was really talented. He was talented in the arts. He was a great artist, but Nicholas really shined in his music. He always had a dream of just doing music.
But just 2 weeks after graduation, he's been brutally gunned down. Detectives asked the Lees if Nicholas had been dealing with any problems.
We came to find out that, Nicholas had struggled with his identity.
Nicholas struggled with being black, raised in a white family. He also struggled some with the move and with fitting in. He just couldn't exactly find where he fit sometimes.
Well, I met Nicholas in the African American culture class. Nicholas wanted to find something of his culture, wanted to explore more of the African American culture.
They say an incident at Nicholas's new school caused a seismic shift in his personality and had made him feel even more like he didn't belong.
Nicholas saw a gun at school, and he came and asked us about it. And then we said, well, Nicholas, you need to say something, see something, say something. So he did that, and it went downhill from there.
That's not a label you want as a new kid in a high school, is a snitch. And once that was placed on him, I really feel that he needed to fit in somewhere, somehow.
After that, his family started noticing changes in him.
He started skipping school, smoking weed. He would sneak out of the house. It was stressful.
Nicholas wouldn't talk to me anymore. He wouldn't tell me about his day at school, almost as if he wasn't my son anymore.
Posts on social media showed Nicholas spending time with a new and dangerous crowd.
On Facebook and on Instagram, him and his friends would take these pictures of themselves holding guns or doing what they weren't supposed to be doing. That was a red flag. That Nicholas was hanging out with kids that were not headed in the right direction.
Then, his parents say Nicholas's life went completely off the rails.
He come home one day, he said, "Mom, someone just shot at me." And I thought, "You just talking crap." He said, "No, someone really shot at me." And he was beat up a couple times. He would come home with bruises, so I know he was fighting at school.
The Lees had even started to wonder if Nicholas joined a gang.
He would want to wear a particular color, or he would want to put a particular bandana in his hair.
I said, what are you doing? What is all this? This is a gang. He says, "No, it's not, Mama. They're just friends. It's like a club," he would tell me.
In desperation, the Lees turned to school administrators and local authorities for help.
But I asked the principal, we sat like this across from each other, and I eyeballed eyeball. I said, "Is there a gang activity at your school? Because here's what we're seeing." He said, "No, it's just street stuff. That's nothing to worry about."
He said, no, there's no gangs in this school. It's just boys being boys. Talk to the sheriff. No gangs here. Even the mayor. There's no gangs in this city. So I didn't know where to go to get help.
I wish they would have gone to an officer in their neighborhood, a regular officer or a regular detective, and they would have probably gotten a different story.
They were telling us there was no gangs, and we were naive enough to believe them. I didn't comprehend what was going on until later.
Has long seemed unthinkable.
Gangs happened in bigger cities, not here on Main Street, USA.
But this misconception has led city officials to downplay a growing problem.
There really was this kind of pushback by folks in Roanoke, and I would include myself in that when I began to first hear about gangs, organized gangs. Well, no, that can't be true. We don't have gangs coming into Roanoke. Yeah, we might have some youth criminal activity, but everybody has that. And so there was this really kind of resistance to that. This doesn't happen in Roanoke. Well, unfortunately it does.
As news of Nicholas Lee's murder hits the local media, residents of Roanoke are left shaken.
And I was watching TV, broadcast news, and they came on, with Nicholas's name. And I didn't have any words. I couldn't cry because it was nothing I could do now. Nicholas was gone.
Eager to aid the investigation, the Lee family opens their home to police.
And they asked to see his computer and those kind of things, so for clues. After about an hour, once we were able to function again and talk, we let him go into his room without a search warrant.
Investigators study Nicholas's online activity and search history, finding a wealth of information.
That footprint led to another footprint, led to another footprint. It wasn't just his footprint, it was the trail.
Detectives look at the same photos that had alarmed the Lees.
There was pictures of him with guns flashing around.
Unlike city officials who wrote off the photos as boys being boys, homicide detectives immediately suspect gang involvement. When they dig into Nicholas's Facebook messages, they find further evidence.
When we reviewed the Facebook messages, someone named Sean Garant was messaging him about missing a meeting for the gang. There was even one message between himself and Garant where Nicholas needed a ride to a gang meeting that Sean Garant had established. So Nicholas said, "Okay, I'm going to get my mom to bring me." And Garant responded, "You can't bring your mom to the gang meeting." And I think that message really showed us how naive Nicholas was.
Investigators used Nicholas's social media to identify a network of potential gang members.
So, once we got all those names together, we had to start researching them. We're looking at Chauncey Levacy, Trayvon Casey, Monte Mack, and Sean Garant. What's their role?
Detectives soon learned that Sean Garant has a dark past.
He stomped a guy to death when he was 16. And I think he served 8 years in prison for that.
During his time in prison, Garant became affiliated with a gang called the Rolling 30s.
In my heart, I believe that while he was in jail, he learned how to be a better gang member. He made better ties. He made everything that he needed to do to come out and create harm to our community.
After Sean was released from prison, he relocated to the Lansdowne housing projects in Roanoke.
He brought that knowledge of that criminal organization with him, brought the contacts he had made. So once he was here, he was able to establish a foothold in the Lansdowne neighborhood. Sean Garant wanted to take over as the most well-known, the largest, and the most criminally violent gang in Roanoke.
Because Roanoke was so often hyper-focused on presenting a pretty facade for tourism dollars, Sean was able to operate largely under the radar in Lansdowne, a neighborhood that received little of the city's attention. He recruited gang members, including DeMonte Mack and Trayvon Casey, before turning his attention to local high schools.
They were in the high schools, and they had infiltrated in there, I believe, to get a youthful force that they didn't necessarily care that much about, that were disposable, and they could do the dirty work and keep the finances rolling for the gang.
It wasn't unique to just Nicholas in the sense that they were recruiting these high school kids that were searching for a sense of belonging.
They were strategic in who they targeted, because they're impressionable, vulnerable individuals I know who are angry at the world, angry at their life, whatever the case may be. You lure them in by pretending that you care.
But if Nicholas had been recruited into a gang, why were the Lees told otherwise?
It could have just been like proximity. Roanoke is a different place after dark for some areas and some neighborhoods. So if you're not close to it after dark, then you wouldn't see it at all. And it may not be for your culture to see it.
There's a lot of people in Roanoke that are clueless of any of the criminal activity.
But the Lee family can't help but feel they were deliberately misled by authorities.
I believe that they knew there were gangs. I believe they bald-faced lied to me and my family, because gangs are bad for business.
Yes, all about the money. Roanoke's a tourist place because of the hiking and the bicycling and all that. And if we got gangs, they're not coming.
They went to the administration and they were like, is there a gang problem? And the administration of the schools and the police department were like, no, that's not a problem. Well, there's a problem. There's a 17-year-old boy that got killed. It's a big problem.
The execution-style murder of Nicholas Lee has awoken a growing realization in Roanoke. Not even their community is immune to gang violence.
When you start seeing death out of order, young people being killed in the street, that gets a lot of people's attention. And people are looking at that like, this is not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to happen this close to home.
Detectives believe Nicholas may have been recruited by a faction of the Crips, known as the Rolling 30s.
What we found was there was a connection between Roanoke's Rolling 30 set and the Richmond-based Rolling 30s. And ultimately, the Rolling 30s writ large, connecting all the way back to Los Angeles, California.
Could Nicholas have been the victim of a rival gang? Investigators still aren't sure. They zero in on a potentially key piece of evidence: the cell phone found near the scene of the crime.
We plug it in, and once I got a search warrant, we were able to look into the phone and see conversations that were going on right before this murder happened and how they were listed by name. So it was a big piece of information to uncover.
Detectives discover the phone belongs to a young man who goes by the name of DF.
DF was a younger gentleman, and he was also from the school.
On the night of the murder, DF was texting with members of the Rolling 30s gang, like DeMonte Mack and Trayvon Casey. The texts are all about arranging a meetup in the location where the crime took place, yet they say nothing about a rival gang or pre-planned crime.
There was no danger indication on that phone that, oh, we're getting ready to do this, or I'm in trouble. His communication ended probably on the phone, probably 10 minutes prior to him getting there. And somehow he's involved 10 minutes later in a murder. We knew we needed to find the owner of the phone and talk to that guy. Maybe he wasn't a suspect. Maybe he's a victim. And so that was a big piece of the puzzle that we had to solve.
Police quickly obtain an address for DF. When they arrive at his home, they find DF hanging out with his girlfriend. Detectives bring them both in for questioning.
He was trying to be the tough guy. I didn't know nothing, didn't do nothing or whatever, but the guy's going to talk to the girlfriend and tell you the real story. So we went in and separated them, talked to the girlfriend.
Right away, DF's girlfriend points the finger at the rolling 30s.
She had told us they wanted him to rob people and shoot people and sell drugs. He was like, I don't want to do that. DF was terrible at being a gang member.
Frustrated by DF's refusal to follow orders, the Rolling 30s came up with a plan to kill him. DF would soon find out that Nicholas was integral to that plan.
They had told him they were going to go meet some girls, and they loaded into 2 separate cars.
So what you've got is Chauncey Levacy and Monty Mack in one car, and you've got Trayvon Casey driving the second car, DF as the front seat passenger, and you've got Nicholas Lee as the back seat passenger.
They drove around, they went to a store, they kind of had this illusion that we're just going to a party, we're going to pick up girls, it's all fine.
They drive out to Tuckawanna. When they get out there, what we find out is somehow Nicholas Lee motions to DF that there's danger.
Nicholas looked back at him and started flashing the gun and making indications physically and non-verbally to warn that there was something that was pretty grim afoot.
According to his girlfriend, DF realized the gang had ordered Nicholas to kill him.
DF's like telling his girlfriend, man, I acted like I had to go to the bathroom and I took off running, and then I hear shots. And I laid there until late in the night.
Based on this account, detectives theorized what likely happened after DF fled the scene.
Whatever happened, they decided that Nicholas Lee did not do his part that he was supposed to do, which was kill DF. So they ended up turning the tables and killing Nicholas Lee.
Detective Dillon confronts DF with his girlfriend's account of what happened. He quickly admits it's true.
So from that point on, we had a good grasp on who was there, what happened.
There's just one issue with DF's story. He didn't actually see who shot Nicholas.
He wasn't there. He had taken off running, as a scared teen would. So he didn't know who had pulled the trigger, but he knew who had the guns.
Detectives are also frustrated that DF's story doesn't place suspected gang leader Sean Garant at the scene of the crime.
So we had an idea that Monty Mack and Trayvon Casey were the shooter. The one thing we didn't know at that point was where Sean Garant was.
When the Lee family learns that gangs were indeed responsible for Nicholas's death, they point the finger at the Roanoke School District and City Hall.
The first thing that pops into my brain is I told you so. But the anger, absolute anger at the school system, anybody connected to the political side, and that's a shame because of that disconnect between what we were told and what actually happened.
My parents asked for help. They asked, somebody please help me with my son. Nobody would listen. Nobody.
Police finally catch a lead in the murder of 17-year-old Nicholas Lee after a witness and his girlfriend spill a shocking tale.
The night that Nicholas was murdered, he was tasked to kill another young boy. He was chased, shot in the street because he refused to kill someone else.
The irony's not lost on me that, Nicholas joined this gang because he was looking to find out who he was. And I think who he was came to light. I think he figured out exactly who he was in that day, in that moment.
To have the wherewithal to say, I will not kill, he laid his life down for someone else. The strength of character that he showed in that moment at 17, I don't think we see that in everyone.
Roanoke investigators are determined to hold Nicholas's killers accountable and to strike a fatal blow to the Rolling 30s organization.
If you really want to make an impact on individuals' lives, you go after the leader.
Detectives believe that individual is a violent ex-con named Sean Garant. Just weeks after the killing, detectives are shocked when Garant falls into their lap.
All he had to do was lay low, just stay under the radar. But 2 weeks later, he goes to a bar and is waving a gun around. He was hanging out with Devon Crowder, who we found was high up in the gang. But what probably nobody knew at that time was we had that bar under surveillance for just other nefarious activities. So there were probably 5 or 6 police officers undercover watching this transpire. So they come zooming in. Well, now Sean Garant gets into a daggone pursuit, crashes a car, has a gun in there, and they bring him into custody.
Garant's associate, Devon Crowder, is also taken into custody. Investigators separate the two men.
Sean Garant was facing 30 years on a gun charge, so he's ready to talk. But he doesn't want to put himself as a gang leader, so he's telling me the guy in the next room, Devon Crowder, is the leader of the gang. Sean, he put himself as a good friend of Nicholas, like he had taken him under his wing. Now go tell me who freaking shot him. And then he's like, man, Monte Mack and Trayvon, they shot him.
According to Sean, the trouble started when Nicholas and DF both began skipping meetings and refusing orders.
And Nicholas and DF just didn't have it in their blood to be a bad guy. I mean, they wanted the lifestyle of hanging out, drinking, partying, stuff like that, but not the hurting people, not the robbing, and not the threats, and not the gun violence.
Nicholas's reluctancy to participate in the more violent and criminal aspects of gang life created problems.
Sean says the final straw came when Nicholas befriended a member of a rival gang.
His friend was another musician, and they recorded some music together.
That friend just so happened to be affiliated with another gang, the Bloods. And so now everyone's coming to Sean Garant being like, man, like, we see your little homie on social media hanging out with Bloods. Like, that's not a good look for you, dude.
Sean says that the Rolling 30s beat Nicholas up and expelled him from the gang as punishment.
Nicholas thought he was done when he got beat up at school. He thought he was done, but he wasn't.
Sean claims he would have been happy to leave Nicholas alone after the beating, but it was DeMonte Mack who decided to escalate.
Trayvon Casey and Monty Mack gave a gun to Nicholas Lee, and then after he didn't shoot DF, they shot him.
The way the gang saw it, it was survival of the fittest that night. Either Nicholas would shoot DF and prove himself to the gang again, or if he refused, Nicholas would be killed instead. Either way, both Nicholas and DF had become disposable.
Sean Garant, he didn't take responsibility for that. He didn't put himself as the leader. He said he was just a G in the gang, and this would have never happened if he could have controlled it. So I'm just like, hey, hold that right there. Let me make sure that we got this right.
Detective Dillon goes to the next room and tells Devon that Sean has fingered him as the leader of the Rolling 30s.
But Devon, he tells me that you're the leader of the Crips Rolling 30 gang. Oh, Devon didn't want that. He goes, that's something. Devon Crowder rolled like a dog at that point. He was like, no, Sean Garant is the leader of the gang.
Detectives suspect Sean ordered the murder, but they can't prove it, and he refuses to admit it. Luckily, he's already going down hard on other charges.
He was carrying a firearm while he's out on probation from his prior murder charge. So he was facing, legally, he was in deep water.
So Sean Garant's in the interview room. We've done a DNA search warrant. We're getting his clothes. He's going to be in an orange jail suit. We ordered some pizza. So I take old Devon Crowder out into the lobby room where we've got these nice little cushioned leather seats and sofas, whatever. I'm like, hey man, you want some pizza? And he's like, yeah. And so we go marching Sean Garant out in handcuffs. And I look at Sean and I go, hey, he's going home tonight because he talked. And I said, I appreciate it. And Davon had cheese hanging off and he was like, no, I didn't want it. And Sean Garant was like, you mother... And that caused quite a bit of unraveling of the rolling 30s from that point.
But unfortunately, Sean's testimony against Amonte Mack and Trayvon Casey isn't enough to put them behind bars.
At that point, who did we have putting a gun in Trayvon Casey's hand? We had his own gang members. Was that enough? You get a guy with a bad criminal history, using him to testify against another guy with a bad criminal history. It's too hard to prove them as a reliable witness.
So investigators decide to take the case to the feds, where they pursue what's known as a RICO charge. In a federal RICO case, defendants can face tough sentences for crimes that are carried out in service of a criminal organization. But before they can bring any charges, the gang strikes again.
They wanted you to know how malicious they were. They wanted you to know how bad they were. It's like no conscience, no soul, no sorrow.
The rest of the gang, one of the members strikes again.
In February of 2018, Trayvon Casey decides to shoot someone else.
Police arrive at the scene and piece together what happened.
Trayvon Casey orders some weed from an individual named Markel Gertie, who comes to sell it to him.
Markel was a son, he was a brother, he was a father, he was expecting his daughter, and he loved that role of being a provider.
But when Markel showed up, Trayvon turned the tables.
When Markel pulls in the lot to sell it to him, Trayvon Casey walks up to the window, produces a handgun, and shoots him through the clavicle, runs away.
The gang members that killed Nicholas are so violent, so little care about life, that when they shot and killed Markel, it was at point blank over $200 an ounce of marijuana.
Trayvon Casey and the victim had coordinated the sale of the weed and the purchase of the weed through social media. And so we knew almost right away again, Trayvon Casey was involved in the killing of yet another young man in our city.
Investigators are still building the RICO case against Trayvon, so they find a different way to get him off the streets.
So the weekend after Markel Gertie is killed, come to find out that Trayvon had physically assaulted a young woman that he was dating, fled the area, and then proceeded to text that female, threatening messages that he was going to come beat her up and kill her.
Police are able to arrest Trayvon on stalking charges and hold him in custody while they work to put together their RICO case.
There is just a ton of work going on behind the scenes, just trying to get as many of these guys locked up for anything possible that we can while we build the case.
And by digging into Trayvon's phone records, they finally find a way to connect Sean Garant to Nicholas's murder.
So we knew that in the moments after the shooting, Trayvon Casey had made a phone call to Sean Garant, probably 4 minutes after 911 call came in.
Then we get witness testimony, individuals that were with Garant when he received the call, which was essentially Trayvon Casey letting Garant know that his orders had been fulfilled. And that's what we were ready to prove in court, that Garant ordered them to do this.
Over the course of 3 years, Sean Garant, Trayvon Casey, Amonte Mack, and Chauncey Levacy, who was present at Nicholas's murder as a driver, are all arrested and charged with crimes ranging from federal racketeering to conspiracy to murder.
When we saw them in court, they all had a presence about them. Sean Garant has a great facade, and he knows how to play that facade, and he learned very well. So, I mean, you could easily see how he tricks and gets people to follow him.
You know, there were several times they would look my dad up and down. We made a pact that we would never turn our backs on them, so we would stand in solidarity and make them leave the courtroom first.
All 4 men plead guilty. Their sentencing is held in August 2022, where they are each sentenced to between 35 and 40 years in prison. At the sentencing, the family gives victim impact statements.
Each of us put a year's worth of work into those victim impact statements. And in mine, I said, shame on you, shame on all of you for letting this happen. And I still mean that in my heart of hearts.
I had no problem looking them in the eye and telling them that this is what you did to my family, and this is what you should have to experience the rest of your life.
For the Lee family, however, the verdicts can never replace what they lost.
And not every family would be able to survive this grief. because it never goes away.
Whenever like I talk about him, yes, I'll smile, but like I feel kind of numb because that part is missing of me.
We are forever and always -1. We can't get him back.
It was the sins of the city. The city was trying to hide it, and I think they still are. So are you asking me what I'm going to do to continue on? I'm going to continue to tell Nips a story every chance I get.
Memphis, Tennessee is known as the center for arts and entertainment in the Deep South. But in 2010, the city lost one of its hometown heroes in a hail of gunfire. The mysterious death of the beloved NBA superstar would confound police for years and bring an entire community together in the search for justice.
I love the pace of the city. It has a lot of soul.
Part of that soul comes from the city's connection to music. Memphis is known as the birthplace of rock and roll, but decades before Elvis laid down his first track at Sun Studios, it was the home of the blues.
Memphis is what we call a chocolate city. It's 65% African American. That shapes our culture and our attitude and the way we are. The blues being founded right here in Memphis on Beale Street. People like Johnny Asen and Bobby Bland and Roscoe Gordon, B.B. King. All of these blues people made Memphis home.
Memphis has always had that good, soulful R&B music, jazz, blues, rock and roll, and it still has it to this day. You can find good music almost anywhere in this city, and we are never at a loss for some good entertainment.
Beale Street also served as an economic center for the town's black businesses. But during the civil rights movement, it transformed into a hotbed of political activism.
Memphis was always sort of a calm town where civil rights was concerned. But all of that changed in the mid to late 1960s.
The sanitation workers decided to go on strike because they were paid miserably, they were treated miserably. They didn't have the proper kinds of health insurance or benefits or that a person needs to just sustain life and take care of a family.
Everybody else was involved in civil rights, coalesced around them. And they were able to get Dr. Martin Luther King to come to town to support the sanitation workers. He led a march. The march turned violent. He was criticized by the newspapers as someone who could no longer lead a peaceful demonstration. He could not let that be the last word, so he came back to do another march. And when he came back to do another march, that's when he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, right here in this city. And this city has really never got over the assassination of Dr. King.
It proved that we had a lot of work to do.
Memphis has spent the last 50 years healing the wounds caused by Dr. King's death. And there's one thing that can always bring the city together.
Memphians love basketball. It's kind of the glue that holds this town together.
It doesn't matter whether you're black or you're white. When you're watching Memphis basketball, everybody's pulling for the same team. And that means a lot in this community.
In 1995, the city got their own team to root for when the Vancouver Grizzlies relocated to Memphis. One of their star players was a 6'11" center named Lorenzen Wright.
I remember when I first met Lorenzen in high school, Booker T. Washington, senior year in 1994. The coach told me, hey, go look at this kid. You're going to like what you see.
Was an outstanding player, big guy. He then decided to enroll at the University of Memphis. It was nothing but excitement.
He was huge in building that program. He was a McDonald's All-American. Everyone, you could tell.
With his family by his side.
Everybody was in front of the TV set that night when the NBA draft went off. The 7th, they called Lorenzen Wright. Everybody screamed.
He was the first-round draft pick. Played in Los Angeles for the Clippers for a while.
After 5 years with the Clippers, Lorenzen briefly played for the Atlanta Hawks before being traded to his hometown team, the Memphis Grizzlies. The town welcomed him, Shara, and their now 4 children back home with open arms.
The fans literally packed the Forum just to see him play. After all, he's a hometown product. And it was just outstanding for him and for us, for him to be here.
He's one of the giants, of Memphis basketball. He's a hometown hero.
Lorenzen was more than just a player. He was also a pillar of the community, volunteering his time and money to the city that raised him. But 2 years later, tragedy struck the Wright family with... But before Lorenzen and Shara could renew their vows, the former NBA center suddenly vanished without a trace. July 18th, 2010, Lorenzen travels to Memphis to attend his sister's baby shower.
Lorenzen was living in Atlanta at this point. So the first thing that he does when he gets back to Memphis is go around town and visit his friends before he goes to visit his kids.
My nephew, Phil, he actually picked Lorenzen up and took him over to Shara's house.
Lorenzen spends the evening with the children and leaves before midnight. But the following day, friends realize he's not answering any of their calls.
I got a call from Shara. Night, ain't heard from him. Have you heard from him? No.
Nobody pushed the panic button because it's so easy for NBA players to say, hey, let's meet in Vegas tomorrow. We'll be at the Caesars Palace. 14 to 15 guys to go jump on a plane.
And we're talking about a grown man who, at that point, was up in age, and how could he be missing? I mean, did he just drop out of sight? We didn't think that was possible.
As days continue to pass, his loved ones begin to worry.
After the 3rd day of saying he's missing, me and Shara both were like, something wrong, this is different.
That then became the top concern in this town for everybody. Where is Lorenzen Wright? And what happened to him?
The answer would confirm everyone's worst fears.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello?
To the city of Memphis, Lorenzen Wright wasn't just a basketball player. He was a role model who proved it was possible for a hometown kid to succeed.
Unfortunately, Memphis has a huge poverty problem. That's just a fact of life.
He saw that so many people had helped him and he wanted to help people back. I have watched him pull hundreds of dollars out of his pocket and literally give it to people. He couldn't stand to see somebody struggling when he knew he could help.
But now, the popular celebrity has disappeared without a trace. As the search continues, the city rallies around the Wright family.
There was a tremendous outpouring from the community when Lorenzen went missing.
I remember that week of suspense, the phone calls, a concern.
Gunshots with...
In looking at Lorenzen's last moments, they uncover an unsettling detail.
One of the first things that investigators did was they looked at his cell phone records, and they were astonished to find that he had tried to make a 911 call hours after he had disappeared.
Lorenzen made a panicked last-second call when he sensed that he was in grave danger, and you can hear the gunshots in the background.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello? Hello?
911 dispatcher answered the phone and did literally nothing. Didn't call the Shelby County Sheriff's Department.
Lost even more faith in the system.
We might not have had this murder mystery on our hands if things had happened right. Because basically what it did was It gave the killers
also suspects he'd gotten involved in the Memphis drug trade.
There were a couple of instances that occurred prior to Lorenzen going missing. Lorenzen Jr. had reported that 2 individuals had approached him in the parking lot after school in a threatening manner and asked where his father was. And then there was another incident reported by Shara Wright that individuals had come to the home looking for Lorenzen.
I got the phone call from her the day of, and she was frantic about it because there were threats against the kids. She said, I gotta call him and contact, I don't know what he into, and I ain't gonna hurt my babies. And that probably about 3-4 days before he ended up missing.
Did Lorenzen Wright get in over his head with the wrong people?
There's a history of athletes being involved in drug activity. Maybe he was in debt to some people. Maybe this was a drug deal that had gone bad. Maybe the Lorenzen that we knew was not the Lorenzen in reality.
The first 48 hours after any murder investigation are the most important. That's when your witnesses' memories are most fresh. The evidence is fresh. A witness can usually give you a solid description of a suspect a couple hours after an incident. A week or so later, not so much. On top of that, evidence gets destroyed the longer you wait. DNA, fingerprints, security tapes gets harder to collect. As a detective, you have to make split-second decisions. And with every waking moment, your suspect is getting further and further away. In the case of Lorenzen Wright, detectives were a full 9 days behind, so they had to play some serious catch-up.
Memphis isn't a town many would associate with violent crime. But in 2010, the city's murder rate was nearing an all-time high as authorities grappled with an escalating drug problem.
Drugs play a significant role in crime culture in Memphis. It's been said that there are 2 causes of crime in Memphis. The first is drugs, the second is women. So virtually all homicides in Memphis are a result of one or the other.
We have a lot of people in this community who don't care about their fellow human beings and are willing to commit crimes and even try to take somebody's life over nothing.
Now, it looks like former NBA star Lorenzen Wright might be the latest victim of the drug trade.
Shara did express fear at what Lorenzen might or might not have been doing, whether he was dealing in drugs. She didn't know, but she was concerned.
These mysterious hit
might have had something.
Cartel ends up sending a hitman anyway.
Career law enforcement think it's a plausible thing, and there's reasons for that too, because the way he was shot. I mean, who would do something like that but a drug organization, right?
The speculation was that they came from Atlanta. They were looking for Lorenzen. 7 days, they could be in Timbuktu.
The former police chief here, he's talking about how close the murder scene was to the airport. And he says he could almost imagine these guys flying in from Mexico, going and killing Lorenzen, getting back in a plane and disappearing into the night forever.
But without suspect.
Lorenzen was smart. He knew Shara would take care of his kids. So he cut $1 million life insurance policy with her name on it. And when that policy came in, she took $150,000, bought a home outright, paid about $20,000 and went to a trip to New York to all the kids.
Was it possible Lorenzen's ex-wife had killed him for the insurance money?
People were openly saying, you need to look at Shara, something's fishy.
They got divorced, and then he's murdered just months later. Clearly, I think there's a motive there.
During their marriage, Shara and Lorenzen Wright had been one of Memphis's most recognizable power couples.
People wanted them at their parties, at their gatherings. Anywhere they went out in public, they were noticed.
But now, rumors are spreading that Shara could be involved in her ex-husband's murder.
There were a lot of people who were saying that she's just not being honest about this, that she knew more than what she was telling.
That was open discussion on talk shows in Memphis. People on the radio, people who even knew her better than I did.
There were rumors spreading throughout Memphis. And when the insurance money came up, it made everybody in Memphis go, hold up, what's really going on?
The $1 million insurance policy isn't the only thing that makes investigators suspicious.
By that time, a lot of the counts had come out.
Shara only adds to the controversy when she publishes her debut novel in 2015, titled Mr. Tell Me Anything.
It's a fictionalized account that's essentially based on her relationship with Lorenzen Wright. It's a woman that is dealing with a philandering husband who is abusive and his subsequent murder.
It's just bizarre that it's so close to the actual story of their life. The parallels are just uncanny. When you get into some of the volatile nature of the relationship, that's when it gets really interesting. It's almost like a confession, you know, that written probably partly in code.
O.J. Simpson wrote a book which said, if I had done it. This was a if I had done it book.
Once Shara's book hits the shelves in Memphis, the city turns against her.
She became a pariah in this town. And again, people thought that she was hiding something, that she was teasing us in a way, that she was manipulative, that she was not the person that she appeared to be.
It's not enough for police to bring charges, but over the next 2 years, their suspicions continue to grow.
In 2015, I interviewed Tony Armstrong, who was the police director. Usually these guys are so guarded. You go talk to a cop, you know, and they're like, they don't want to tell you anything. He willingly did the interview. He all but accused her of this.
Shara suddenly picks up and moves to Houston with a new boyfriend. And then she leaves him for another guy in California.
She wanted to get away, I believe, and try to put this all behind her in some fashion. And that's what she tried to do.
Then, in 2017, investigators finally get a break in the case after receiving a tip.
A lot of us got word that something was brewing and the police department was about to make a big announcement. Later that same day, they announced that they had found the gun in a lake in Walnut, Mississippi.
They do ballistics tests, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation does, and they match the shell casings that were found around Lorenzen's body.
The finding of the murder weapon really changed everything.
I remember saying, this is going to crack the case, primarily because there was no way for the police to just accidentally stumble upon a gun in a lake in remote northeast Mississippi without someone who was actively involved in the homicide itself telling them exactly where the gun was.
To investigators' surprise, the gun isn't linked to Shara Wright or a drug cartel. Instead, it's registered to a 48-year-old church deacon named Billy Ray Turner.
I knew nothing of Billy Turner. I had never heard of Billy Turner before.
My initial reaction was one of being totally baffled. What's going on here?
In some cases, the police have no other option than to offer a plea deal if it's going to lead to catching bigger fish. The criminal can receive a reduced sentence or even immunity if the evidence can be used to prosecute someone else. You would think that most cases end in a trial, but over 90% of the cases in this country end in plea deals. You never want to let someone off the hook who's committed murder, but if it means being able to put everyone involved behind bars, sometimes it's worth it.
In the 7 years since Lorenzen Wright was murdered, Memphis has been struggling to come to terms with his tragic loss.
For a person who was as high profile as he was, and he had played in the National Basketball Association for over a decade, and for him to be killed, the case had generated a lot of publicity.
Because the community wanted to have the answers. It was awfully frustrating for people who wanted to know what happened and wanted to see somebody punished for it.
And in November of 2017, police finally find a piece of evidence that may lead them to his killer.
Finding that gun brought everything about this case back to the forefront.
In the minds of the law enforcement, that was the piece, the critical piece that they needed.
We were ecstatic because we'd waited so long for some news about who did this to Lorenzen.
At first, investigators find it hard to believe that the murder weapon belongs to local church deacon Billy Ray Turner. But it turns out this man of the cloth has a history of violence.
He had been convicted of a few violent crimes, including aggravated assault and kidnapping.
What's particularly interesting, however, is Turner's relationship with Lorenzen's ex-wife, Shara.
Billy Turner had done some work around Shara's house for her. She knew Billy Turner from her church. And at some point, they had a brief romantic relationship.
He also had a lawn service, a yard service, and he actually used to cut her grass. And then we found out that she used some of the money that she got from the insurance to buy him his lawn equipment. So she sort of financed his business.
After all those years of suspecting that Shara had her husband killed, that's the connection that you're looking for. It's not hard to see her getting this guy to do her dirty work.
I never met him, know anything about him. But I knew that Shara was very capable at manipulating men. And I suspected that, like we used to say, he fell for the okie doke.
Before they move in to make the arrest, investigators lay a trap for Lorenzen's killers.
They announced they found this gun in the lake. Now, they haven't arrested anybody, but they found this gun. I'm sitting there thinking, why would you do that? Because everything, they always hold on to everything. But what were they doing is they were floating that out there so that the principal suspects would panic, and that being Shara and Billy Ray. And they tap their phones and they start getting this communication going back and forth. And that's where they find out, you know, that Shara's talking to Billy Ray in code at one point, saying something to the effect that someone went somewhere and found something, which means, you know, they went in the lake and found the gun. They orchestrated that beautifully.
In December of 2017, Billy Ray Turner and Shara Wright are both arrested by Memphis police.
Shara was guilty in the eyes of the community well before she was arrested. So I think when she was arrested, the community felt somewhat vindicated that their suspicions had been correct all along.
I don't know if it gave us complete closure, but certainly the community felt that we were on our way determining once and for all, after all of these years, what actually happened to Lorenzen.
3 months later, at Shara's bond hearing, a clearer picture of Lorenzen's death finally starts to emerge.
Prosecutors drop a bombshell at that hearing, including the tip that the informant was Shara's cousin, Jimmy Martin. He's the one that told them about the gun being in a lake in Mississippi.
Jimmy Martin had been convicted of second-degree murder. While he was awaiting sentencing for that homicide, he met with law enforcement, and he said that he knew the location of that murder weapon.
The kicker is that he says that he knew where the gun was because he was with Shira and Billy Ray after the killing.
He was with Billy Ray when they were cleaning up the murder scene, and they drove down just across the state line into Mississippi and threw this gun into a lake.
And according to Jimmy, it wasn't the first time Shira asked them to kill Lorenzen.
Went down to Atlanta with Billy Ray Turner in the weeks before the murder actually happened, with the idea that they were going to murder Lorenzen down in Atlanta. Billy Ray and Jimmy Martin go to Lorenzen's condominium and open a window and go through the window. Lorenzen isn't there, but there's some guy sleeping on a couch. Lorenzen has a lifelong friend, Michael Gibson, and he's told me that I think I was the guy on the couch. He always found it puzzling that Shira was down there like a day or two before the murder in Memphis. She was down in Atlanta, and it was kind of like, well, what are you doing here? The police information is that she went in the house and unlocked the window.
Jimmy testifies that the first try doesn't work out, so she reschedules for Lorenzen's trip to Memphis. But Jimmy claims he wasn't there.
By his account, he wasn't at the murder. He was more of a cleanup man.
However, Shira's attorneys insist that she had been wrongly accused. If anyone had a reason to kill her ex-husband, it was Jimmy.
When we first got the case and we reviewed the discovery materials, we thought that Jimmy Martin would be the perfect person to have killed Lorenzen. Because, again, he had the opportunity and the ability. He also knew so much about the case. He knew where the murder weapon was, and that's not something that someone who is loosely connected with the case would know. He had killed before, and I thought that he could certainly...
Reliable witness. This is definitely not going to be a slam dunk for the prosecutors.
Despite the lack of evidence, the city of Memphis seems to have already made up its mind.
From the point that she was arrested, she was certainly, in the eyes of the public, she was guilty.
People remember the 911 call. They remember the several days decaying in the hot sun. They remember the lies. So there was no sympathy that was being given to her at that point.
At Shira's pretrial hearing,
for several years, that she was filled with rage at being disfigured by Lorenzen and that she wanted revenge.
As her trial date approaches, the city of Memphis prepares for weeks of scandalous testimony.
It was going to be a brutal trial, and it was going to be scorched earth. If her accounts are true, and she says they are, of the physical abuse, I mean, that's a real problem. Is that reason to kill somebody?
But before opening statements can begin, Shira has another surprise in store.
She suddenly decides to plead guilty. She says that she wasn't the one who killed her ex-husband, but she facilitated the murder.
There were concerns on both sides that a trial would have been very messy. From the state's perspective, I'm sure they were concerned about the abuse that was inevitably going to come out.
They just opted to not do this knockdown, drag out. You know, you never know what a jury's going to do. If somebody's going to plead, that's a slam dunk.
Lorenzen and Shira's 6 children now have to navigate life without their mother.
And that she's going to prison as a result of it.
Billy Ray Turner also strikes a deal on weapons charges and receives 16 years in prison. His murder trial is still pending.
People are expecting a thorough prosecution. a thorough...
About Lorenzen Wright's death may never be known. His family and his fans will always remember the man he was, on and off the court.
When I look back on this young man, a phenomenal basketball talent, a caring young man, I can't help but have a sense of loss.
People come up and tell you things like, you'll get over it. That's not true. When you lose someone you love, you never really get over it. You learn how to adapt.
We deserve to have full closure of this case. We deserve to move forward past this, knowing that justice was done. And until that happens, I don't think that we will ever be really completely satisfied